Hi, my name is Laurel, and I'm here today talking with my colleague Cindy Shu. Cindy and I go way back to various programs that we were in before we got licensed. And we've been chatting recently, and some of our conversations I felt would be really great to share with all of you. Because one conversation in particular that really struck us as important is how to find the right fit therapist. It's something that I get asked all the time. And it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. You know, when you're in a place where you need help, you're struggling, you're dealing with some tough situations. The last thing you want to be difficult is finding a good therapist. You kind of just want them to appear because that's what you're needing. So I'm really happy to talk to Cindy about that. Cindy, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So what comes to mind for you when someone asks you that question? How do you find the right fit therapist?
That's such a great question that every person who is looking into therapy should ask themselves.
Yeah.
The purpose of therapy, in my opinion, is the relationship between the therapist and the client. So
Yeah.
that fit is so important. And one of the ways for you to find out if this therapist would be a good fit for you is if they are culturally competent.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is, are therapists open and curious to learn and about your own individual cultural experiences?
Yeah. Okay. And to take a step back from, that piece of cultural competence, which I think is paramount. I think we also need to talk about what is culture, like
Mhm.
what does it mean to, well, first of all, what does it mean to be culturally competent? But first of all, what variable are we working with here? When you say culturally competent, what would it look like, and what do you mean by culture? Because
Right.
I have things that come to mind for me, but they're going to be different for everyone.
Yes, exactly. You're
Mm-hmm.
exactly right. It's different for everybody. For me, my background's Chinese American. I'm a female, heterosexual, things like that. Versus other people have a whole list of
Mm-hmm.
unique cultural experiences. It could very well be your nationality, your sex, your race, your ethnic background, things like that.
Religion.
Religion.
And stuff like military affiliation, like that is its own um, cultural experience in itself. And I could see how, working with a therapist that had no understanding of military background would be challenging,
Right.
to have to explain all those things. Yeah. Um, so what are some things that people should consider when trying to find a culturally competent therapist?
I think what's helpful is to first identify your own cultural experiences. What
Mm-hmm.
is important that the person you're sitting in front of understands about you?
Mm-hmm.
What is important to you? Just because someone might be Asian American, it might not be at, the forefront of their mind. It might
Mm-hmm.
not be a cultural experience that they're wanting to explore.
Yeah.
So it's first identifying what are some unique points that you would really hope to kind of dive deeper into
Mm.
therapy, and is that therapist able to do that with you?
Mm. So kind of like your spiritual or racial identity may actually be secondary to your experience in the world working in fine art, if that was something that was really critical for your therapist to understand.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so, culture, it can span so many different things. And, sometimes it is a racial or ethnic thing, but it can also be, as we mentioned, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and then, other kind of identity groups. And um, I'm curious, sometimes it can be really hard to find someone who's culturally competent in all the intersectional identities that a person might have. So in that case, it might be best to kind of think of what's most salient. And this is what you were just saying, what's most salient in terms of your experiences that you need your therapist to understand.
Mhm.
So once you've boiled it down to like, okay, I really need a therapist who understands my experience as a queer woman, and I have found someone I think is a good fit. What would be some red flags that maybe your therapist isn't culturally competent in the way that you need them to be?
Totally. And, I would imagine it would be incredibly hard for therapists to fully know every
Yes.
sort of cultural
Mm-hmm.
experience an individual has.
Yeah.
I think the biggest key is for therapists to kind of approach each individual with a cultural humility.
Mm.
It's important to come from a position of curiosity, of openness, and
Mm-hmm.
willingness to learn from their own clients
Mm. Yeah.
about their specific cultural experiences. I can't say that I know everything under the sun about the client that sits in front of me, but it says something when you're really excited to
Mm.
be informed and also to want to kind of walk alongside as they're also figuring that out for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you really hit the nail on the head by identifying humility as being so important, because is there anything worse than an arrogant therapist? Someone who's just going to tell you about yourself? No, you're there to explore and have a guide and a facilitator, but not someone to tell you what to do or who you are.
Exactly.
So that humility piece.
Yeah.
For me, what comes to mind, in kind of looking at the opposite, how you might know that your therapist is not culturally competent or not a great fit is, well, first of all, if they are telling you about yourself and your identity and your experience, or painting broad strokes, or were superimposing their own experience onto you. I had a therapist do that to me once, and I had to tell her to stop. um, but if you're experiencing like some frustration in having to explain your experience to the therapist. Now, again, no therapist is going to completely understand every nuance of your experience right off the bat. That's just impossible. There's going to be some cultural difference, no matter if it's just, if you may share a lot of identities and experiences, but there may be a generation between you, or a family dynamic that is different. But if you're having to spend a lot of your session time explaining your experience to your therapist, that there is a way it could be done where it would actually be really great, and you would feel like it was helpful to explain your experience. But if you feel like you're having to educate your therapist repeatedly and it's cutting into your time to actually reflect on yourself and do your own work, that's kind of a red flag.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, and it's also just being self-aware when you feel a resistance in the therapeutic room. If you're like,
Mm,
I just can't seem to get my words across in a way for you to understand what I'm
mm,
saying. This is just getting really frustrating, like you said. I'm feeling really unseen and unheard.
mm-hmm.
I don't want to keep having to, provide you with information just so that you can understand me a little
Yeah.
bit more.
Yeah.
That sort of tension. When you find that right fit therapist and someone who is culturally competent and humility and practices humility, you get the sense of like,
Mm,
this person gets me. This person
mm,
is open to me. This person wants to learn about me and my
mm-hmm.
unique experiences. It's a
Mm,
completely different shift. And so that's when you know that you are in the right place with the right person
yeah.
as your therapist.
I just get that feeling of relief when you experience that, like that, like, okay, they get me.
Mhm.
And that feeling of being seen, feeling understood. um, it doesn't get much better than that, right? Feeling understood and seen.
Mhm.
And everyone deserves that in their therapy. Everyone.
Mhm.
I think that the relationship between you and your therapist is too important to just have an okay match.
Mhm.
You don't want it to just be okay. This is, a deeply intimate process. It's an investment of time and resources
Right.
and vulnerability
Mhm.
that you're putting yourself out there to another human being, and it should be a great match.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and reciprocated. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that the therapist can see and witness your vulnerability is incredibly validating, especially if you come from a culture where you don't even really feel comfortable to do that with your closest friends and family. The fact that you could potentially open up to a therapist that you don't really know, but that person would really receive you well and validate you and your experiences, that's where the healing begins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And, on the other side of that worst case scenario, if you are with a therapist that doesn't understand your culture and, is not, that there's just that disconnect, you may actually re-experience some microaggressions or, the kind of the stress, the minority stress of, particular identities that you hold. And that's actually very damaging to have your therapist reinforce things that you're experiencing out in the world that you need healing from.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be re-traumatizing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Individuals come to therapy to work through trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and if a therapist is not culturally sensitive, is not aware of their own biases and prejudices, it could very well really create a lot of further harm and trauma
Yes.
to the individual sitting in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of being in therapy and being a therapist is to not traumatize people any
Yeah.
further, but to really give people an outlet to work through that trauma and to create some strength from that.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg of this conversation, but I wanted to just, kind of wrap up by seeing if we can throw out some types of culture that maybe wouldn't come to mind, some factors that would make a good match that should be considered that maybe aren't primary, but maybe really critical in making a good match. Something that comes to mind for me is finding a therapist that uses humor in the way you do, or at least works with the way you use humor. Kind of has the same energy level. Some therapists are very placid, very calm, and some therapists are upbeat and really chatty. And finding someone that feels like a good fit for you, that is kind of a cultural consideration, even though it's not aligned with a particular identity or interest group.
Right. I mean, it could very well be just personality match. That's really important. Do
Yeah.
you enjoy spending time with your therapist? Do you
Mm-hmm.
feel like you connect on, a deeper level? And do you feel like you're on the same sort of energy
Mm-hmm.
level, things like that? Those are all considerations.
Yeah.
And,
And
and
may be more important than sharing a particular, cultural identity. That click of finding a really good personality match sometimes can override other things, and you might be willing to do a little more educating about a particular experience you've had, if it is a great personality fit.
right,
Yeah.
definitely. It's really important for clients who are looking for a right fit therapist to really think outside of what they think therapists are or supposed to.
Mm,
I guess just to share a little bit of my own experiences, when I worked with a therapist, I never thought to seek an Asian therapist
mm,
or even a therapist of color. That never even really crossed my mind. Um, I mean, that's a whole other topic, but I feel like if I could have done things differently, I would have really looked at my own cultural values and current cultural experiences and looked for someone who kind of mirrored that. I
mm,
think I think that's an important part of the therapeutic process is for your therapist to be able to mirror all parts of you. And your cultural history and background is so much of who you are. And so for that to be seen and honored in the therapeutic space is incredible. It's really important. So with that said, I would encourage people as they're looking for the right fit therapist to just really identify what is important to yourself and see if the person that you're on the phone with for that initial consultation, if they would be a good match for you in
mhm.
those ways.
Yeah. I also want to mention that it is okay to try out a couple therapists. You should be transparent about it. You should say, I'm really making sure I get the right fit, so I'm going to do a session with a few people, and tell the therapists that you're working with that. You can't do multiple sessions with multiple therapists. It's not really, we're not allowed to do that, unfortunately. But you should be able to get a good sense in a session or two of how a therapist works, if it's a good personality match, and some beginnings of their cultural competence, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess just something that I wanted to add at the end is, you know, so much emphasis is placed on the therapeutic process. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it really comes down to whether both parties are willing to be open and vulnerable and responsive toward each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a lot of ways, those things help kind of navigate the difficult experiences, the cultural nuances. If there is that foundation of trust and reciprocity and, you know, sort of mutual understanding,
Mm-hmm.
then I would say that is a right fit therapist for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Cindy. We can keep chatting for hours about this, but I don't think people want an hours long video to watch. So if people have questions for you, or want to work with you, or want to talk about finding the right fit therapist, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to find me on my website. It's Cindy Shu Therapy. Or you can email me at cindyshootherapy@gmail.com.
Okay.
And I personally really enjoy working with individuals who maybe struggle with depression, anxiety, or trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And also an overlayer of that is my passion is to work with Asian American community.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is sort of the cultural understandings of wanting to serve a population that maybe is underserved in the
Mm-hmm.
mental health. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think your clients are lucky to have you. And in a way, I'm kind of sad that we're friends because I can't be your client. But thanks so much. If people want to get in touch with me, my website is laureltherapy.net. And you can schedule a free consultation right there. I also have a professional Facebook page at Laurel MFT. And thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you,
All
Laurel.
right. Have
Great
a good
chatting
one.
with you.
Yeah. Bye.